So we have some breaking news that a new Morning Consult poll shows that 55% of Americans now support Medicare for all. That's a 9-point increase since last month, and that increase is being driven by Democrats, Republicans, and independents. And yet, despite the fact that people are moving towards a healthcare vision as advocated by Bernie Sanders, universal single-payer healthcare, Joe Biden continues to oppose it. There's no doubt in my mind, and the data here shows it at least somewhat, that the current health crisis is driving people's conviction that having healthcare linked to your employment status, or having healthcare linked to the employment status of your spouse or your mother or your father, isn't working in the best of times, but it's especially not working right now. That's why you were seeing that even as Democrats in various primary contests were voting for Joe Biden, they were also supporting Medicare for all in the exit polls, often by large margins, showing that even though they were going with Biden for whatever reason, people were lining up for single payer. People were lining up for a universal single payer model and not the Joe Biden hybrid model, which still largely seeks to preserve the idea that if you can, you should get healthcare from your private employer. That's how you should get your healthcare. But it's not going to work because Biden's plan at the best of times leaves 10 million people without insurance. And today is April 1st. It's April Fool's Day. This video's got no April Fool's jokes. But it's also the day when rent is due for a lot of folks who don't have money right now. And crucially, a lot of people who have lost their jobs, or whose spouse has lost their jobs, or whose parent has lost their jobs, are going to start losing their health care today. And this problem will only continue to intensify as people find themselves unemployed. The idea is that as many as 30% of Americans could be unemployed, that unemployment could reach 30%. And if a lot of those people, the vast majority of them who have healthcare in the first place, now lose that healthcare, you could have dozens and dozens and dozens of millions of people who had healthcare no longer have it. And that means that whether we're talking about treatment or testing for the current crisis, or for other health issues that may arise during the time in which they are unemployed, they could find themselves totally uncovered. And so you add to that unemployment, potential eviction, the loss of all of your savings. You add to that the fact that you no longer have medical insurance and you're one misfortune away from bankruptcy. It's going to cause unnecessary stress on millions and millions and millions of Americans that they don't deserve to face at the best of times, but especially right now. And Joe Biden continues to insist that the private model works. People are moving away from that idea. Again, this poll shows that 55% of people, that's a strong majority of voters, back Bernie Sanders' vision. And for the first time in at least a very long time, according to this poll, that includes a majority of independents. And again, Republicans are still opposed to Medicare for all, but less so than they have been in a long, long time, demonstrating that whether you're talking about the conservative movement or the liberal movement or whatever you want to call it, Medicare for all has growing support as people realize that the private insurance model does not work. Joe Biden and his stubborn refusal to realize that is failing to seize an opportunity to show that he can unite progressives and that he can change his vision to fit what people need. It's not flip-flopping. It's called listening to the facts and evidence before you and listening to the voices of the people you seek to represent, and then saying to yourself, maybe I was wrong. Some people might call that flip-flopping, but Joe Biden, if he is going to be the nominee, it's not a guarantee yet, has to start realizing that the mode of healthcare he has backed is woefully unequipped to deal with the crisis that millions, perhaps tens of millions, God forbid, hundreds of millions of Americans, working in middle-class Americans, will find themselves dealing with during this crisis. And that going forward, if you want a system of healthcare that gives people confidence that when they don't feel well and they may have something that can affect others, that they can go to a doctor, get tested, get treatment, get medication without worrying about cost, and thus mitigating future crises like these, single payer is the only way to go. Again, even under Joe Biden's most charitable interpretation of his plan, which is that everyone is covered through a combination of public insurance if they choose it, or their private model at their workplace, 10 million people will be uncovered. And it doesn't take a whole lot of uncovered people to create a situation like the one the world is dealing with right now. Every single last person, no matter their income, needs to have universal, single payer, across the board healthcare. That is the only way to effectively deal with the crisis as it exists right now and to prevent future crises from happening, or if they do happen, preventing them from happening to the same degree. Joe Biden has been exposed time and time again in this primary. Everything from his cognitive decline to his threats to slap voters, to his allegations from Tara Reade. These have all been, ways in which Joe Biden has been shown to be a weak and rather, troubling candidate for the Democratic Party if he becomes the nominee. But it might be the case that his continued opposition to single payer, despite all the evidence and growing support from the public, acting in contrary to his vision, might be the thing that hurts him the most in the general election when it comes to the fact that he can't mobilize a growing public movement in favor of single-payer healthcare. But you don't have to make that mistake, because there's still a man in the race who is backing single-payer. A man who people are finally catching up to. A man who was right about the healthcare needs of Americans during normal times, but is even more correct now. And that man is Bernie Sanders. And if Democrats want to win this election and implement a policy that, again, a strong majority of Democrats support and a majority of independents support, and that a strong 55% of the entire country supports, then Bernie Sanders is the man to go forward. Now, I'm under no illusion that the corporate wing of the Democratic Party doesn't give a damn about what regular people think. That they don't care that a majority of people, a majority of independents too, support Medicare for all. They don't care. Because the profit motives, the fact that they benefit from an elite-driven, unequal system of healthcare, that's what, drives their interests. But regular Democratic voters have already shown that they support Medicare for all. And they need to realize that putting a man in office like Joe Biden, who not only opposes single payer, but would veto it if it ever got to his desk, is not the man that represents the values of the Democratic Party or even of the average voter. And if you want to win in this election, I get it. You want to defeat Donald Trump at all costs. A man who rejects a growing movement of people who want healthcare equality is not the quote-unquote safe choice. The safe choice is the man whose ideas are where the public will eventually end up at. And they're catching up to Bernie Sanders. And mark my words, by November, if you make Bernie Sanders the nominee, people will be ready for his democratic socialist vision for healthcare and for wider society. And he will be a great president for working and middle-class Americans.